Okay.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Take a Stand Summit. This is an event, you have to excuse the wind in the background. A tropical storm has just hit the island, typical, just as you go live. But anyway, I digress. You're going to hear 35 incredible stories. And these women are sharing their stories of something that has happened in their past, which has created trauma, which they've needed to work through and heal. So they're going to be sharing their unique lived experience of triumph over trauma. And we could really do with your help. If you enjoy, please do consider subscribing to the YouTube channel. Make sure you press the like bell or notification. Please share if you can think of anyone in your network who is struggling with whatever it is that we're talking about, depending on how the conversation goes. Please do share this video with them if you think that it is going to help. You never know, it could be the difference that makes the difference in their life. There could be something that they need to hear. But we need to get the world out there because this is such an important topic that doesn't get covered enough. And I was just talking to my next guest, Beverley, and she was just sharing a beautiful poem with me. And I thought it would be a great way to start, because then we could start to find out a little bit, be a bit more curious, find out why you created the poem. So welcome, Beverley. I'd love to hear your poem.
Thank you, and hello, Wendy, and hello to anybody who's listening, whether it be live or on the recording. So I'm going to share this poem called Don't Tell Me, Ask Me. Don't tell me I will be okay. Ask me how I am. Don't tell me to stop crying. Ask me why I am. Don't tell me you're doing it wrong. Ask me if I know how. Don't shout at me if you are angry. Ask me about it when you are calm. Don't punish me for trying to talk to you. Ask me gently what I want to say. Don't assume you know best for me. Ask me how I feel about it. Don't make me feel guilty for saying no. Ask me what's right for me. Don't talk about me when I am in the room. Ask me my thoughts about it too. Don't tell me I am bad. Ask me why I did it. Don't tell me to be strong. Ask me if you can help. Don't tell me how to get over it. Ask me what I need. Don't judge me on what you have heard. Ask me about my story. Don't label me on your own beliefs. Ask me about my journey. Don't tell me, ask me, no matter how young I am. Don't tell me how I should be. Ask me how it is. Don't tell me how I should act. Ask me if I know how. Don't tell me who I am. Ask me who am I. Don't tell me to respect you. Ask me what respect means to me. Don't tell me to hug you. Ask me how I feel about it. Don't tell me to kiss you. Ask me as I have a choice. I may be young and vulnerable. However, I am older than my age. Ask me how it feels at times so I can use my voice to speak out and be heard.
Wow, really powerful. And you were saying that the poem has developed over time and that you've added sentences on the journey of the creation of the poem?
Absolutely. So one of the tools that we talk about when we want to make change and when we want to tap in to our own self and our emotions when we're so used to shutting them off is about journaling. And I found that particularly difficult. It was very challenging. And then for two reasons for that. And we'll be going back into my story, but part of my story that I'll tell where my fear of writing down came from was my English teacher asked us to do a story and we had to use 500 words. But in my private life, I had so much emotion and trauma that I was going through, and to actually sit down and find the time to create my story took a mammoth effort to get it done. I was really proud that I'd done it. And when I came back, it had a huge C- in red on it. And I was devastated because it's subjective as well. She didn't know what was going on in my mind, and it was how I saw it at the time. And then she also became my foster mum later on, about another year later. And I went to join her in her family, and she had a younger son, which was fantastic and really done out of, a big heartfelt gesture. But this is where we see things from different perspectives, because I didn't know how to be part of a normal family. I'd never been part of a normal family. But also, she couldn't understand why I didn't know automatically the things that her younger son knew. But he'd grown up in that environment from the time he was born, and I hadn't. And so these sentences aren't just about for my foster mum. They're different messages that I received along the way. Either they were said to me, or they happened to me, or there were subliminal messages that I was picking up all around me. And when I started to try and write things down, I found it challenging. So I wrote down the don't tell me part first. And then I responded to the voice that I wanted to have. But as I said, it didn't just come out, because I think sometimes we think that when people say journal, I know I did, we think, oh, we've got to write all these pages and sentences and get all our emotions straight out. But no, everything that we do takes a learning, and it takes steps. So this did take quite a while, and I just kept going back to it and adding to it. And I didn't write it with the intention of sharing it, but it's been really prolific, and I've shared it many times. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for sharing it. And when I was listening to it, it was like polar opposites, isn't it? You've got the vulnerability and the hurt and the pain. And then on the other side, you've got the strength and, taking a stand. This is what I want to happen. They're two very different experiences.
Yeah, and thank you, because I hadn't actually myself realised that, because it's like anything, it's part of our norm, isn't it? So I hadn't looked at it like that. So Wendy, thank you.
Yeah, I mean that's what came across for me was the vulnerability, but then also the power of it as well in the voice. So I can imagine when you were bringing it together, were you doing a lot of soul searching in terms of, this is the bit I need to look at now. This is the next add-on.
Yes. And it's like any personal development we're starting. And when I say personal development, it can be counselling, it can be trauma. The right things have to come out at the right time. We're like an onion.
Yeah.
And even my story that I'm going to share with you today, there's some parts that are still fairly new that I share. I only share information that I've been able to work through. But that's part of my own self-care. It's to enable me to be in the right place. But also I want to reassure any listeners, yes, I will be sharing some things that are tough to hear, but I don't go into absolute detail. It's like a dashboard. So I won't go into lots of different minute detail.
Yeah. And also it's not necessary.
No, it's not. And that's what I like about peer-to-peer groups as well, because there's some language that you don't actually have to say. But also, I like to reassure people that have not experienced trauma or want to support somebody, and they're unsure how their language is going to be received. And I say, please just ask me in your way. And if I find it offensive, or I feel that there's something else that can be said, I'll share that with you gently. I won't be taking your head off, and
I mean, I've called this Triumph Over Trauma intentionally, but sometimes when I'm sitting here listening to us, I'm thinking, trauma is such an umbrella term. Trauma encompasses so many emotions, so many experiences, so many feelings, so many ways of being. When you think about your own story of triumph over trauma, what's the bit that you would like to focus in on to share? So I'm not just making it too broad for people that they're thinking, trauma, what's trauma?
So, well, the first thing I'm going to say is everybody's experience of trauma is unique, and no one has it worse than others. The other thing is sometimes it becomes our norm. And there are different things that happen along the way. And the story I'm going to share with you today is actually a really pivotal point in my life that I wasn't able to appreciate for years. And it was a trigger at first. And triggers come in all forms. And I've heard people say, don't use triggering words, etc. Well, if we did that, we wouldn't use language. You know,
Yeah.
I know I've been triggered with
in the
an image.
background could trigger people. This plant could trigger someone.
Absolutely.
My hair.
Colour. Absolutely. So that's one misnomer I want to get out of the way.
Yeah.
But so I want to go back and just share when I was 15. So when I was 15, I was living in a children's home. And at that time, it was my second children's home. We were all teenagers. And I came home from school and I was sporting a love bite on my neck. And that gave me kudos. I was a teenager. I was 14, coming up 15, and I got this love bite and I walked into the children's home, or shall I say, I strutted into the children's home, because look at me. Somebody loves me. Somebody wants me. I am worthy. All that's the language that's projecting to everybody in that environment. And Auntie Helen, who ran the children's home, quite a formidable lady, and she had to be. We were all teenagers, but she was one of these ladies that was very, some would say strict, I'd say firm, because she had a big heart as well. And she sat me down that evening and said, oh, I see you've got a love bite on your neck. And I was like, yes, of course I have. And she said, do you understand the difference between sex and making love? And I was quite taken aback, because she's speaking to me as an adult. And I was like, no. And she went on to explain about the difference between sex with just anybody and making love, about boundaries and self-respect. And it was the first time I'd ever had a conversation like that with anybody. And she was talking to me about, it's the one thing you can give away too quickly but can't get back is your self-respect. And that you and that when two people are in love, they have their boundaries, they make their agreements, and in the height of passion, they'll give love bites, but often in places that you can't see it. And I was blown away by her honesty, and it was her honesty that I value. It's one of my big values, and I valued it. But I was also quite scared, and straight away I went, oh no, I got this at the bus stop. Because I was a young schoolgirl. And suddenly she helped me to see, without calling me names, she helped me to see how, to me, that message meant that I was worthy, I felt loved, but how to other people it could be received wrong. But I thanked her for the conversation, and I am truly grateful for that conversation. But it took me years before I could be grateful, because what it also did, it opened up a lot of shame and guilt, because I suddenly realised the enormity of what had been happening to me since I was the age of 4. And I was being sexually abused. But that was happening in that part of my life. And what I was doing as a normal teenage girl and exploring was two very different worlds.
Yeah.
And I think people don't understand that sometimes. And that's when things started to come around me, when I realised the impact. What it did also give me was the next time that my dad took me to his friend's house to abuse me, I had that voice. She gave me that voice without even knowing the power of what she'd done with me, with that conversation, or given to me in that conversation. And I was quietly able to say no. And he didn't come near me again. I didn't shout it. I just said it. And yeah, that was the start of my recovery, but I didn't realise then, because it took years to find my voice again.
Yeah. How old were you then? Did
So
you say 15?
I was 14, nearly 15,
Yeah.
when I was able to say no. But
Yeah.
I was 4 when he started to abuse me.
And you were in care during that time, so were you going home and visiting?
Yeah, well, when it very first started, I wasn't in care. So I lived at home with my mum and dad,
Yeah.
with 2 siblings. And I'm just going to say siblings because they have their own story to share, and it's not for me to share on their behalf. And I remember the actual incident and the day that it started. And that's something that some people don't understand. It doesn't matter how long it's been going on. There are some things that you don't forget. What you do, you learn to be able to manage it and switch it off at times, that you have coping mechanisms. But not long after that, we had a knock at the door and we were taken by the police, myself, my siblings and my mum, in a black police van, you know, the old black police Mariahs, where
With
they
the blue
open the back
light,
doors. Yeah, in you go. So we went to the police station and we were taken into care. And then we had another sibling join us when he was 6 months old in this children's home. I have to say, I absolutely loved it. It was a place of safety. We were nurtured and stayed there for 6 years. And in that time, I was going home every 2 weeks to my parents, because that's what you do.
Yeah.
And to everybody else being in the outside world, being in care is the worst thing for me and my siblings, or say for me personally, it was the best thing. Going home meant that I was being sent home to my abuser and also one of his friends who abused me too. So at the age of 10, at the beginning of December, we suddenly got told, you're going to go home and live with your mum and dad and all your siblings, because there were 6 of us by then. You'll be there for Christmas. And I couldn't say anything because I'm being told by all these adults, and I'm not saying they were wrong. You're going home. Isn't that wonderful? They've now got a house, your mum and dad. You're going to all live together. And I had night terrors for the next 3 nights. And I was comforted, but nobody asked me why I was having those night terrors. And at 10, I didn't have the words.
Yeah.
So I went home, and obviously the abuse continued and it ramped up. In that time as well, there were other things. Both my parents were alcoholics. They did work. They were functioning alcoholics, but they didn't come home. So I would have to be looking after the family, and we had no gas, no electricity. So in the last summer before we went back into care, I was making 1-pot meals on a little camping stove for the whole of the family at the weekend, not during the week. And then for school uniform and to look good, we cut the cord off of the iron, and I'd heat the iron on the camping stove just to give a presence to the outside world that everything was okay. Anyway, thankfully, and I do say thankfully, neighbours and different people called the NSPCC with their concerns. And after about 3 phone calls, the NSPCC came to visit us and we all went back into care. I was 13. Sadly, because there were 6 of us and there were different jurisdictions, we went into different areas and different homes. And then, as I said, at 15, I got fostered. So the year of becoming 1450 was quite a busy year for me in the way things opened up. And sadly, at 15, not sadly, at 15, at 16, I should say, the fostering broke down because I didn't know how to be part of a normal family. And so I went to live in a hostel in Bromley, Kent, a YMCA hostel, which was for vulnerable young people. And that's when I instinctively knew I could make changes and I had choices. And that's when I started to change my life around, because the hardest thing is when you're a care leaver, or a kid from care, should I say, the beliefs around you and what you receive are that you're not going to be very successful in life. The expectation is exceptionally low.
Yeah.
And sadly, the forecast is low all around you because of the lack of support and understanding that's around about the effects of trauma.
I think your poem sums it up so beautifully, because I was brought up in the care system as well, and it just, when you're brought up in that environment, and your poem says it all, is that you're not able to make one decision for yourself. Nothing. You actually learn to become helpless, I believe. You learn helplessness, which is a trauma response, which takes it. You're lucky if you discover actually that that's what you've got or learn.
And that's when you become institutionalized. So one of my biggest values that I hold very dear to me is about people having informed choices. And when I say that sentence, don't talk about me in the room, ask me my story. You'll know from being in care that you have all these different meetings, case meetings. There'll be your teacher there. There'll be people from outside your living environment that when you live in a family home, you don't get any of this. This doesn't happen. But you have all these people sitting around the table, and it can be up. I remember one meeting, there were about 10 different people.
It's
And
torturous.
and also one of those meetings, my mum was there with my dad, and they were still in a relationship, and my mum's lover was there as well.
Wow.
Yeah. And yet I wasn't, and I wasn't able to, or I wasn't being asked what was right for me. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's really going to be really hard for anyone to get their head around who hasn't lived and experienced the care system and the dynamic of it, because it's not just about you as a child that you're taking on. You're actually dealing with the politics of the children's home, and then the politics of the social workers. So you're pretty much meaningless in the dynamics of those relationships, because they're too busy squabbling amongst themselves and power dynamics and what else is ever playing out, that you just seem to be the brunt. I'll talk from my own personal experience, but you just seem to be the brunt of everything that isn't going right. And they make you feel responsible for whatever isn't going right as a child.
Absolutely. And also it's like, any child, when things are broken, around them, such as their parents not giving them love, we go inwards and we take it as our responsibility. It's our fault. We're not, there's something wrong with us. And, as a child, a very young child, people weren't horrible necessarily, but what have you done? If they found out I was living in a children's home, what did you do?
Yeah.
I didn't do anything.
No.
And that message carried through, it got to the point that I wouldn't say that I was in a children's home. And I've actually heard the conversation with a school friend when I was at my senior school in my second children's home. As I was leaving, my friend's mum actually said, "Don't forget to count the cutlery. You do know where she lives."
Ooh.
Yeah.
Ouch.
So there's all those different messages that it's compounding all the time on top of, the toxic relationship when you're at home, and you should respect your mum and dad, and you need to be, the best place for these children is to be in a loving family home. I say a loving environment. And if it happens to be with your biological parents, lovely. But if it's not, then with your caregivers that are around you, that is what is important for children.
Yeah,
it's
very different, isn't it? It's a very different dynamic. Doing where you are now with Step Forward, what is it that is there a theme that you see that is common, that keeps coming up to the surface again, common problems, a common issue that people always present with. It's like almost takes the forefront.
Absolutely. And so I'm a recovery practitioner, and I'm looking at the physical and also the mental, because when we say about mental illness, we seem to talk about this if it's just in our head, and it's not. Our bodies are amazing. They're built to keep us safe. They're built for survival. So the common factor that I see with most people coming to work with me is we've learnt to survive really well. That's something we do. You know, when I see about teaching children resilience, we can do that. That's the bit that we do. And then we become overachievers often. And when you are overworking, when you're, you know, work hard, play hard, when you're in that environment, you know, when I was in corporate world, you know, I loved it. Give me a target, I'll work towards it. You know, that was all my survival skills coming to the fore. Being vulnerable, absolutely not. Because I learned as a child, and many people do in different circumstances, my clients do, they may have learned that they were in a loving family home, but they couldn't speak at meal times. So they have issues with their gut and eating because they've learned to be quiet. You know, they learned how to adapt. And it's the emotions that we look away with, you know, the feeling of trauma. So what's common with my clients is we work, first of all, on the physical aspects, and we look at what's physically happening and understanding how the body's reacting mentally, neurologically. Then when we've got some acknowledgement of what's happening and some coping mechanisms in place, so a wellness basket is something I'm always passionate about. Learning that word self-care and self-nurture, because it's okay focusing out on everybody else and nurturing everybody else, but as was said before, it's about coming inwards, starting with us, because we can't have a relationship or look after anybody else until we're able to learn to look after ourselves. And that was really hard lesson to learn in my adult life. And I think that's the biggest thing that we forget to do, or we don't know how to do. So it's looking after ourselves, I say, is the biggest challenge for a lot of people, and accessing their emotions.
So that must come into the step forward part then, because we were talking before we went live about, I was giggling because I was going, step forward. Oh my God, that's like the biggest challenge of all, is stepping forward.
Absolutely.
It's like actually acknowledging. It took me a long time. It's taken me like 40 plus years to actually acknowledge everything that I've been through. And I'm sure there's still stuff missing. Over 40 years to even go, okay, that wasn't right. None of this was right.
Yeah.
Actually, that long. So that stepping forward bit for me was like several lifetimes of not being able to. It's like the hardest part.
And that's why, so my logo there with the 2 feet, there's a reason behind them. So the left foot is all about our past, and it's where we are. That's where we got our left-hand side of the body is all about our past. And the pink is you suddenly realizing, I'm standing here, I want to try and heal myself. This is where I am. I want to give myself some love. Okay. We don't understand all of it, and we can't at times, because our brain has the neurological pathway, the amygdala has done its job and shut that part of the brain down, that coping mechanism, our
Done
emotions.
a good job. Really
it's done
good.
a very good job. Yeah.
Yep.
So our reactive part, the part of our brain that is wanting us to respond, that's why sometimes we've run from things, or we fight, or we freeze. We don't actually have a choice about that. That's our body keeping us safe. It makes the choice in a nanosecond.
Yeah.
The right hand foot is about, okay, I now acknowledge I need change. I can't get from A to B just like that. I don't know how to, but let's start and take one step at a time. And it is about acceptance. And all of our healing journey, you know, I'm a believer, we learn something more about ourselves each day. And so the orange colour represents moving forward, adventure, because it is an adventure, but also how to switch off that adrenaline, put us back into the parasympathetic mode, help us to be calm, help us to shut down that worrying mind, help us to just be, but most importantly, to take the mask off and be who we are, not who we feel we should be, which is the expectation of others.
I like that. I like that. I'm actually just thinking about, I'm thinking when things get a bit tough for me, that's a really good thing I can play over in my head between the 2 feet.
Yes.
I have this thing about 2 paths. One path is going to take you off in a predictable way, and the other path you live consciously, which is your feet. So those feet would be the conscious, and take me in a new direction. But you know, just one step in front of the other. I love that. I love that.
And sometimes what becomes challenging when we're at a very low point, and let's be honest, one thing I'm very honest about in conversations, because let's get it out there, silence only exacerbates things, is when we get that low, or even, you know, suicidal, often it's not a life we want to end, it's how we feel, this heaviness, this waking up. And that's the fight between our conscious thinking and our subconscious. Because our subconscious is like, whoa, hold on, I don't know that. I don't understand that.
Yeah.
But our conscious thinking is like, no, that's the choice I want to make. Yeah, okay, but, you know, this happened before. Look what happened. And that's when our bodies become ill then.
Yeah. And I think the more we can get into a two-way I have two-way dialogue. I was just about to say several 3 or 4, but that's actually not true in my case. But I will have a constant dialogue between what I call my traumatized self and actually the person who I really am. And I will constantly have those 2 dialogues between myself pretty much every day.
So how I like to tap
Don't tell anyone.
Well, how I like to tap into that and explain that more, and I think there's an author called Michelle Chalfant, and she says it in a really descriptive way, which works for me and I use for my clients as well. And that's about the adult chair. So imagine having 3 chairs. So you've got your younger self chair, your very young inner child. You've got your teenage self, who can be quite angry, who wants to have a voice. You know, I know that I can tell you some of these points. This is my teenage self. You know, talk to me. You know, don't talk to them, talk to me. And then there's my adult self of who I am now. And oh, if only I had half the knowledge I have now back then. We can't change that. But what we can change is I know that if I get triggered or I'm reacting in some way and I'm really hurt, etc., I literally go to that younger self chair and what is it you need? What is it that you're feeling? And I literally have that conversation. I also have little tools all around me. And I just wanted to share this because one of the things that came out in the early conversation, and I think is so important, is when we're supporting others, we still need to be supported. We still need to check in. Life happens.
Yeah.
You know, we're human beings. And I use note sticks or post-its. And they're all different messages. And you can see this one's really old because it's come from years ago, but I carry it around. It's part of my mental wealth, is what I say.
Nice.
Wealth and mental health. My mental wealth. I carry it in my purse. And it says, Beverley, I hear you, and it's okay to speak out. Because there are times that we keep quiet, and then just sometimes it's like, no, this is what I have to say, even if it's not going to be received. Well, it's important. It's our boundaries.
It's also learning that dialogue, isn't it? It's also learning compassion, love, forgiveness, acceptance. It's like the balance of what you're not used to. It's like the start of the nurturing, the loving dynamic, which
absolutely
a lot of us have lacked.
Absolutely. You know, so I'm not going to go into it personally. This is not the right place to do it because it's all at life. But there was a personal thing that when I was 15 and I was fostered for, that I was picked up. And I didn't understand. I didn't know about that. It was only when my own daughter was 2 and she did it without even thinking. And it was a real mirror. It was like, now I know why she got angry with me, but I didn't know to do that. No one had taught me. I'd naturally taught my daughter. But because I was taken into care at 4, my parents were neglectful. That's why we were taken in under a court order. So that doesn't just happen because, they forgot to clean the house once or twice. We were neglected completely. So then when you went into a children's home, and again, as much as I loved it, there are lots of you. So there are some things, because you're 4, people think, oh, well, they know how to do that. You know, and
it's another conversation.
Absolutely. And I say that
scary conversation,
and I will share in different formats. I will share in different places, but when it's open like this, I don't, because I'm obviously thinking about other people and my own boundaries.
Yeah, of course not. Of course not. So what's one piece of advice you would tell your younger self?
This is the bit that makes me very emotional, because I did not realise the strength my younger self had, and I'm not ashamed. I've got tears coming up in my eyes because I am so proud of that younger self. And if there was one thing I'd say to her, is trust your instinct. Trust your instinct, because your instinct is the thing that's keeping you going. And too many times I've been, I was told, you're being over dramatic, you're lying, you're not believed. Do you see what I mean? No. If it feels wrong for you, it is wrong. And I did pass that message on to my children when they were younger, growing up. If it feels wrong, it's wrong for you.
That's a great message. I like that.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. Thank you very much for sharing that. I really appreciate it. And thank you for spending time and sharing your incredible life challenging stories.
And thank you, Wendy, for having this platform and putting it out there, because I am a big believer that silence doesn't stop anything, and there's a big misnomer that, oh, be quiet, that happened in the past. That happened years ago. Well, actually it did, but the impact still happens today. And it's happening with other people.
Absolutely. And it's funny, I was talking to someone a couple of months ago, and she said, I don't know anybody who's suffered trauma. And I just thought, that's just not true. It's just not true. It's just either you're just not hearing it, recognizing it, seeing it. But for sure, statistically, I can't reel off the stats because I don't know them, but the stats I have seen are shocking.
Well, I can tell you,
jaw-droppingly shocking.
Absolutely, and I can share with you on sexual abuse. I can give you some stats. So 1 in 4 people, and we're talking men and women here, we're talking people, 1 in 4 people will have experienced some form of sexual abuse in their under age 18 and younger. That doesn't mean to say they won't experience it as young adults, because that does happen, and sexual violence, we know that. But from 18 and younger. Also, the misnomer is it's strangers that we don't know, stranger danger. Sadly, it is not. It is trusted people. It is people who, are in the family, close family members, and you have to remember this, or trusted people within the environment of a child. Because it doesn't necessarily have to be in the family home. It can be outside the family home. So I'd like to leave on a positive. I'd like to leave on a positive, because I don't want to end it on, these facts are important. But that's why I believe that by having these conversations, what it enables is people to have an awareness And then if they feel that there's a young child that's not happy, they can maybe ask them, how are you feeling? Why do you feel like that?
Yeah. And people can start stepping forward, like it says with your feet. People can start stepping forward. They can start taking a stand for themselves. And, who knows where those opportunities are going to take people. And I think that's really ultimately what we all want to get across, is that, we have been through terrible things, but we have come out the other side, and we're able to have these conversations, and we're able to move on. You don't need to suffer in silence.
No, and the majority of my clients are high achieving people who something has happened. It may be that the pressure has got too much, or it may be they've got divorced, or there's been a bereavement, and suddenly they felt overwhelmed. So to the outside world, everything is, working really well, etc. They're very successful, etc. But inside, and that's what I'm passionate about, because, we are all human, and I know what it's like to walk around with that mask on all the time.
So what I'll do then is, I know, I'll pop Beverley's details below. So website, address, more information of how you can get hold of her. Remember, if you think that what we've been talking about and Beverley's been sharing, please do share it with other people if you think it is going to be a help. Remember to click the notification bell, the like bell, and subscribe. And thank you very much for your time. I've really enjoyed talking to you. We have quite a lot in common because we were both spent so much time in care.
Yes. With the kids from care.
With the kids from care. You don't actually meet that many of them. I think, unfortunately, most of them are in prison, statistically.
Yeah, well, I'm actually still involved. So I'm involved with the Institute of Recovery of Childhood Trauma. I'm a member.
Right.
And that's a passion, and that's my putting back. So I'm actually at the House of Lords next Friday for a forum.
Enjoy.
So,
yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure. And I look forward to listening to all the other speakers as well over these next 4 days.
Yeah, fabulous. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.